He saved an alien village from predators. Now the chieftain's daughter claims him by law. The jungle air, thick and damp, was choked with the acrid stench of burning thatch and superheated plasma. A crimson bolt sizzled past, vaporizing the trunk of a great tree and showering the clearing in molten splinters. Below, the village was a vortex of screams and energy fire. From his perch in the canopy, Jericho watched. His Kestrel-class scout ship was a kilometer of shattered alloy and dead systems, smeared across a mountain he couldn't name, on a world that wasn't on any star chart. His mission, covert observation of the Cathalian Empire's supply lines, was over. He was a ghost, a non-entity, and for 3 days he had maintained his protocol. Observe, do not engage. Predator, 7 feet of high-tech armor and arrogant malice, laughed, a grating, digitized sound. It had cornered one of the cat-like village warriors and was toying with him, using a kinetic pulse to repeatedly slam the native against a rock. The warrior, armed only with a spear, was broken and bleeding. Jericho's gaze remained cold, his breathing steady. This was not his fight. Then the predator turned, its helmeted gaze landing on a small hut. A child, a small female with the same feline ears and terrified blue eyes, huddled behind a woven basket. The predator raised its plasma caster, its targeting laser painting a red dot on the child's chest. Jericho's discipline didn't just break, it evaporated. He moved. He didn't drop into the clearing. He melted into the lower branches, a shadow detaching itself from other shadows. He had spent 3 days watching, not just the village, but the predators. He'd seen them hunt. He knew their patterns. He knew their arrogance. A second predator, this one a scout, was moving along the perimeter, its optical camouflage shimmering. It was heading toward Jericho's flank. Jericho didn't engage it. He let it pass, his hand already on the high-tensile liana vine he'd spent the morning rigging. The scout strode confidently, its heavy feet crushing the undergrowth. It passed the trigger vine. Jericho pulled. The mechanism was primitive, but the physics were pure. 100-kilo sharpened log, counterweighted and anchored, swung from the canopy like the fist of a vengeful god. The predator didn't even have time to turn. The log struck it square in the chest. Its personal shield flared, absorbing the kinetic energy, but the sheer, brutal mass of the impact did its job. The shield shattered with a sound like cracking glass, and the log's sharpened point drove through the armor, the chest, and the spine, pinning the predator to a tree 20 meters away. One down, the clearing was still chaos. The first predator, the leader, was now stalking toward the center. Jericho moved, dropping to the jungle floor, his boots making no sound on the damp earth. He'd smeared his face and suit with a sulfurous mud, masking his heat signature from their scanners. A third predator, a heavy weapons specialist, was laying down suppression fire. Jericho circled behind it. He saw the warrior it was firing at, a female, fast and fierce, her movements low and fluid. She was good, but she was trapped. Jericho pulled a micro-tool from his salvaged kit. He'd already reverse-engineered their comms frequency. He sent a short, high-energy burst. The heavy gunner's helmet display sparked. "Knar! Comms are down," he bellowed in his own harsh tongue. He slapped the side of his helmet, distracted. It was the only opening Jericho needed. He didn't attack the man. He attacked the tech. He sprinted from the shadows, his combat knife coated in the same non-conductive mud, punching through the rubberized seal at the base of the predator's neck. He ripped the power conduit free. The suit locked up, armor freezing in place. The predator stood, a 7-foot statue, its weapons silent. It couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only watch as Jericho vanished back into the smoke. "Vrel, report!" the leader snarled, seeing his gunner go silent. He turned from the broken warrior, scanning the tree line. This was no longer a hunt. It was a fight. And then he saw her, the female warrior Jericho had seen earlier. She stepped from the smoke, her body a canvas of lean muscle, her bright blue hair matted with sweat and dirt. Her tail, a matching shade of blue, twitched with focused rage. It was the chieftain's daughter, Xylani. She held 2 short spears, their obsidian tips gleaming. "Come then, sky demon," she hissed. Vrel, the predator leader, laughed. He activated his own shield, a ripple of energy, and spread his arms wide, inviting her. Xylani screamed a primal cry and charged. She was impossibly fast. She fainted, ducked under a plasma bolt, and drove her spear at his unshielded throat. The blade shattered against the energy field, inches from his skin. He backhanded her, the impact sending her tumbling. Jericho was moving. He'd seen Vrel's shield generator. It was back-mounted, standard mercenary tech. Overconfident. Vrel stalked toward the downed huntress, raising his plasma caster for the kill. A fine trophy, he savored. Jericho dropped from the branch above, landing directly on Vrel's back. He didn't use his knife. He slammed the salvaged, overcharged power cell he'd pulled from the heavy gunner's suit directly onto Vrel's shield generator. It was like crossing the streams. Vrel screamed as 1 billion volts of raw power fed back into his own suit. The generator exploded, sending Jericho flying. Vrel's armor smoked, glowed cherry red, and then went dark. The predator twitched, spasmed, and then collapsed, steam rising from the cooked circuits and the cooked flesh within. The jungle went utterly, profoundly silent. The only sound was Jericho's harsh breathing as he pushed himself to his feet, his body aching from the blast. Xylani rose from the dirt, her stunning feline eyes wide. She looked at the smoking husk of Vrel, then at the frozen statue of the heavy gunner, then at the predator pinned to the tree. Jericho retrieved his knife, wiping it clean. He saw the severed head of the pinned predator, a grotesque trophy from his trap, and grimly hacked it free, holding it aloft as a sign that the threat was over. He expected gratitude, he expected fear, he got neither. Xylani approached him. Her walk was not one of relief. It was a slow, predatory appraisal. Her eyes, a piercing lupine blue, were not looking at his face. They traveled from his shoulders, down his arms, to the blood and mud on his hands, to the lethal efficiency of his posture. This was not the look of a victim. It was the look of a connoisseur. He raised a hand, his universal gesture for "I am not a threat." She stopped him, her voice a low melodic purr that vibrated in his chest. "You," she said in her own tongue. She raised her spear. Jericho tensed, but she didn't aim for his throat. She pressed the razor-sharp obsidian tip gently against the center of his chest, directly over his heart. Her warriors emerged from the smoke, surrounding them. They did not aim their weapons at him. They bowed, their heads lowered to her. An elder warrior stepped forward, his face a mask of grim respect. He looked at Jericho, then at Xylani, and then translated her words, his voice heavy. "The huntress Xylani, daughter of Tavok, invokes the Savior's harness." Jericho's tactical mind sifted through the words, finding no meaning. "I don't understand." The elder's gaze was unwavering. "You saved the bloodline from the predators. By the old law, your life price is forfeit. You are hers." The obsidian spear tip rested against his sternum, a single point of cold pressure that anchored him in this new reality. Jericho's gaze was locked on Xylani, but his mind was a blur of tactical calculations. 20-plus hostiles, feline, high-strength-to-mass ratio. He was exhausted, his body humming with post-adrenaline tremors, his left forearm a map of screaming plasma burns. His sidearm was inert. His knife was just a knife. He had one option, compliance. "I would not," the elder translator warned again, his voice low as he saw the muscles in Jericho's jaw tighten. Slowly, deliberately, Jericho's right hand moved. He unclipped the retention strap on his holster. The snick was unnaturally loud. He drew the useless pistol, holding it out, grip first. He repeated the motion with his combat knife, sliding the 8-inch blade from its sheath and offering it. Xylani didn't take them. Her luminous, lupine eyes watched his face, not his hands. She was studying his expression, gauging his submission. She gave a short, sharp nod. A male warrior, broad-shouldered and scarred, stepped forward. He didn't snatch the weapons. He took them, one by one, with a deliberate motion before backing away, his own spear never wavering from Jericho's center mass. Disarmed, stripped. The feeling was worse than the pain from his arm. It was a profound violation of his entire being. "This way, Savior," the elder said. The title was not a courtesy, it was a brand. They marched him through the smoldering ruins. The smoke, thick with the smell of burning hides, stung his eyes. Survivors emerged from root cellars in the deep jungle, their faces streaked with soot. They stared at him, this outworlder, this ghost. But their gazes didn't hold gratitude. They held awe. And they all shifted instantly to Xylani as she walked past, her head high. They weren't celebrating a hero. They were admiring her trophy. He was brought to the village center, before the largest dwelling. It was a longhouse, built of thick, dark timber logs, its roof a complex weave of thatch and cured hides. It stood untouched by the fire, a clear symbol of power. At its entrance stood the chieftain, Tavok. He was magnificent and terrifying. Taller than his warriors, his body a roadmap of faded white scars. His blue-furred tail was missing its tip, and his face looked like it had been carved from hardwood. His eyes, a shade darker than his daughter's, held a chilling, pragmatic intelligence. "Father," Xylani said, "it was a statement of fact, not a request for an audience." "He is the one?" Tavok's voice was a gravely bass that seemed to vibrate in the ground. "He is." Jericho stepped forward, his military bearing taking over. "Tell him," he said, his voice level, addressing the elder. "My name is Jericho. I am a traveler. My ship crashed. I meant only to help. I will take my weapons and leave your territory. I am not a threat." The elder dutifully translated. Tavok listened, his expression as impassive as a stone mask. He didn't look at Jericho. He looked at his daughter, who stood beside the human, a silent, possessive shadow. "You have invoked the harness," Tavok said, his gaze fixed on Xylani. "I have," she replied, her voice clear. "The law is clear. He is mine." As she spoke the words, she made her move. It was subtle, possessive, and utterly debilitating. She stepped to Jericho's side, flush against him. He could feel the heat radiating from her skin. She placed her hand on his left shoulder, her fingers gripping his trapezius muscle. It wasn't a comforting touch. It was a brand, a physical mark of ownership. Jericho's entire body went rigid. Every instinct, every ounce of his Black Ops training screamed at him to break the contact, to create space. He willed his muscles to obey, but he couldn't. He was surrounded, disarmed, and this single anchoring touch held the power of the entire tribe. Tavok finally turned his gaze to Jericho. The chieftain's eyes were not cruel, they were simply absolute. "The elder will speak my words," Tavok rumbled. "The Savior's harness is the oldest law. It is a bond of life, forged in the death of our enemies. You saved the future of this tribe. Therefore your life, your will, belongs to the one who carries that future." He nodded a single final gesture to Xylani. "You belong to my daughter, the law is satisfied." There was no appeal, no negotiation. It was a judgment as final and immutable as gravity. Jericho's tactical mind, which had always seen 3 steps ahead, went blank. There were no more steps. Xylani gave a short nod to her father, a gesture of equals. Then she turned and walked away, not even looking back. She knew, with the absolute, terrifying certainty of an apex predator, that he would be made to follow. Her warriors gestured with their spears. "Move." He was marched to her dwelling. It was set slightly apart from the others, larger, its timbers darker. He was pushed through the heavy hide flap, and it was dropped behind him, sealing the world out. The interior was dim, the only light coming from a central smoldering fire pit. It was warm, and the air was thick. It smelled of wood smoke, of dried herbs, of cured leather, and of her, that sharp, musky, feline scent that was now seared into his memory. Weapons lined one wall, spears with gleaming obsidian tips, long curved knives, and powerful-looking recurve bows. This was no prison, a prison he could analyze, dismantle, and escape. This was a cage of a different, more psychological kind. Xylani was in the center of the room watching him. Now they were alone. He was a ghost operative, a man trained to observe, to analyze, to know. Now he was the specimen. Her blue eyes roamed over him, slow, deliberate, and deeply unnerving. She wasn't cataloging a threat, she was assessing a purchase. She stepped closer. He stood his ground, his hands loosely at his sides, forcing his breathing to remain slow and even. "Show no fear." She ran a finger over the nano-weave of his damaged undersuit, her nail lightly scratching the synthetic material. He felt the light trace through the fabric, a line of fire on his skin. "Strong," she murmured in her own tongue. Her gaze found the raw red plasma burn on his forearm. Before he could even register her intent, she seized his wrist. Her grip was like a steel trap. His body reacted instantly, a lifetime of training compressed into a single reflex. He tensed, pulling back. Her grip crushed down. A low, warning growl vibrated in her chest, a sound that bypassed his brain and lit up his primal fear receptors. It was the sound a predator makes just before it rips out a throat. He froze, his muscles went slack. She held him like that for a long second, asserting her dominance, before her grip relaxed just enough to be clinical. She examined the wound, turning his arm over in the firelight. Then she released him. She turned to a shelf and picked up a small wooden bowl filled with a pungent green salve. She dipped her fingers in and, without a word, grabbed his arm again. She began to smear the thick salve onto the burn. It stung, a chemical fire that made his eyes water and his muscles jumped, but he bore it, his teeth grinding together. Her touch was not gentle. It was firm, proprietary, and utterly unconcerned with his comfort. She was tending to her property. When she was finished, she pushed his arm away and went to the fire. A skewer of smoked roasted meat sat on a rock near the embers. She picked up a piece, its juices sizzling, and held it out to him. He stared at it. The command was implicit. He was a soldier, a human, not an animal to be fed from the hand. He didn't move. Xylani just waited. Her expression was flat, her arm outstretched, the offering a challenge. The silence in the hut stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire. He was hungry, he was wounded, and he was hers. Hissing a breath through his teeth, a sound of profound self-loathing, he snatched the meat from her hand. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her mouth. Compliance. She ate her own piece, tearing at the meat with sharp, white teeth, her eyes never leaving him. When she was done, she pointed. A pile of thick, dark furs lay on the packed earth floor near the entrance. "Your place," she said, the two words in her language clear enough. Qatar, a word for a den. Then she turned her back to him. With a complete, unthinking lack of modesty, she began to unstrap the few pieces of leather armor she wore, vambraces, a chest guard, letting them drop to the floor. She was clad only in the simple, fur-lined loincloth and a thin leather band that covered her breasts. She walked to her sleeping platform, a raised dais on the far side of the hut, covered in the finest pale pelts, and lay down, her back to him. Jericho stood, every nerve ending screaming. This was the test. This was the final assertion of the new dynamic. He knew with absolute certainty she was not asleep. He could hear her breathing, slow and steady, but it was the controlled breath of a hunter in a blind, listening for the snap of a twig. He finally moved, his limbs feeling like lead. He sat and then lay on the furs. They were soft, warmer than he expected. But they felt like chains. The air in the hut was suffocating. He was trapped by her presence, by her scent. He lay awake in the dark, his tactical mind racing, cataloging the hut structure, the guard patrols he'd clocked outside, the escape routes into the jungle. It was all useless. He was caged not by walls, but by her. He had no moves left. The days bled into one another, marked by the slow, agonizing healing of Jericho's arm. Xylani's green salve, which she applied every night, had worked, but the ritual was part of his torment. He was a restless captive. His life, once a self-directed exercise in control, was now a script written by her. He woke when she woke. He ate what she brought him. He was a ghost operative, and she had, Kennel trained him. The psychological weight of it was suffocating. He spent his days in a state of coiled, useless readiness, his mind a high-performance engine with no throttle. He sat by the fire, sharpening a piece of obsidian she had given him, a safe tool, and he catalogued her every move. She was a creature of absolute primal confidence, her body always in motion, and she watched him, always. Even when her back was to him, he could feel the weight of her possessive gaze. This morning she took him out. "Come," she ordered, tossing him a simple cured hide tunic. He was being paraded. He followed her, as he was now forced to, 2 steps behind and to her left. Her warriors, rebuilding the shattered palisade, would pause, their eyes flicking to him. They didn't see a man. They saw the savior, the harness prize. They saw her property. The humiliation was a cold knot in his stomach. She led him on a hunting patrol, deep into the humid jungle. He was forced to walk in her footsteps, a leashed shadow, while she moved with an instinctive grace that shamed his training. She stopped, suddenly her body going low. She pointed. Through the dense foliage, he saw a 6-legged armored boar rooting in the mud. "You," she whispered, her voice a low purr against his ear, the sudden proximity making his neck burn. Show me the ghost." It was a test, a command. She wanted to see her new pet perform. He hated her for it, and yet the chance to act was a drug. He slipped into the undergrowth, his movements liquid. He circled the creature, silent, downwind. He used the cover, his mind going cold and tactical. He climbed, a shadow in the canopy. He waited. The boar moved. He dropped. He struck it from above, his improvised obsidian blade finding the soft, unarmored spot behind its skull. It was a perfect, silent, lethal kill. He stood over the carcass, breathing hard, the familiar rush of a clean strike clearing his head. He turned. Xylani was there, leaning against a tree, her arms crossed. She was not watching the kill. She was watching him. Her feline eyes were half closed, her expression one of profound, almost carnal satisfaction. She was aroused not by the violence, but by the efficiency. "Good," she purred. Before he could react, she closed the distance. She ran the back of her hand down his chest, over the damp tunic, her claws lightly scraping the fabric. "Mine," she whispered, the word a final damning brand. His hand twitched, wanting to close around her throat, but he couldn't. He just stood, frozen, as she took the kill knife from his hand. That was when the horn blew. It was a deep, wailing sound from the village. An alarm. Xylani's entire demeanor changed. The owner vanished, replaced by the huntress. She grabbed his arm, her grip like iron. "Come!" They ran, sprinting through the jungle, back to the village. The sounds of chaos reached them before they saw it. Shouts, screams, and a new, terrifying sound. The high-pitched thwump, thwump, thwump of suppressed projectiles. They burst into the clearing. It was a different kind of attack. The predators were back, but their behavior was wrong. Plasma fire was sporadic, high and wide, aimed at the tops of huts, not at people. It was hurting. "Into the hut!" Xylani snarled at Jericho, shoving him toward her dwelling. She was protecting her property. He ignored her. He was an operative, and this was a tactical puzzle. He slipped into the shadows behind a large fallen log, his eyes scanning the battlefield. The predators were not fighting like warriors. They were fighting like trappers. A large, male villager, one of Xylani's best, broke from cover. A predator didn't raise his caster. He fired a projectile that burst open, releasing an energized net. It enveloped the warrior, shocking him into spasms before he collapsed, unconscious. "Kale!" Xylani screamed, seeing her second in command. Kale was a whirlwind, dodging a net and burying his spear in a predator's unshielded thigh. The predator roared, but instead of gutting him, it fired a dart from its wrist gauntlet. The dart struck Kale in the neck. He staggered, his eyes rolling back, and crumpled to the ground. Jericho's blood went ice cold. Stun nets, tranquilizer darts, non-lethal takedowns. The predators weren't just avoiding Xylani. They were actively ignoring her. They scooped up the unconscious forms of Kale and two other large male warriors. A small armored dropship, which had been hovering just above the canopy, descended. They dragged their 3 prizes aboard. They ignored the children. They ignored the elders. They even ignored Tavok, who stood by the longhouse, roaring in helpless fury. The dropship's engines whined, it lifted, and in seconds it was gone. The clearing was silent, save for the weeping of the wounded. Xylani stood, trembling, her chest heaving with rage. "Cowards!" she spat, her voice cracking. "They fear us! They steal our warriors like thieves!" "No," Jericho said, his voice flat. She spun, her eyes blazing. "What did you say?" He stepped out from the shadows, his mind working, the pieces clicking into place. "That wasn't an attack," he said. He walked past her toward the council fire, where Tavok was already standing. The elder translator hurried to his side. "Tell them," Jericho ordered, his voice taking on a new, hard authority. "That wasn't an attack, it was procurement. They didn't miss with the plasma. They were hurting you." Tavok and Xylani stared at him. "They didn't want to kill you," Jericho continued, his eyes cold and analytical. "They wanted specimens." "Specimens?" Xylani hissed. "For what?" "The first attack," Jericho said. "The one where I arrived. That wasn't a hunt. That was a test, a field trial. They were seeing how you fight, how strong you are, how fast. They were gauging your combat effectiveness." He pointed to the sky. "Today they took your best, your strongest. Kale, the other 2, they were the elite." Tavok growled, "Why? To what end, Ghost Man?" Jericho stopped, his gaze pinning them both. This was the moment. They aren't doing this for sport. A mercenary group this well-equipped, this organized, isn't acting alone. They're fulfilling a contract. He let the weight of that land before he delivered the final, devastating conclusion. They are harvesting you. They're taking your warriors to a lab. They'll study them, map their genetic code, learn what makes you the perfect hunters. Tavok looked confused. The elder struggled to translate the concept. Making copies? Men from nothing? But Xylani understood, not the science, the violation. Her face went pale, her expression twisting from rage into something far more terrifying, a cold, primal horror. They would make our people, she whispered, the words catching in her throat, like tools, like tamed beasts? She understood the ultimate insult. It wasn't capture, it was farming. The idea of her people, the ultimate predators, being bred and raised like livestock, their spirits broken, their bodies mass-produced for war, it was a defilement of their very souls. She turned to Jericho. The look in her eyes had changed completely. The master-to-pet dynamic evaporated, burned away by this new horrific revelation. The possessiveness was still there, but it had been reforged. She was no longer looking at her prize. She was looking at her sharpest, most lethal weapon. "You," she said, her voice a low, lethal hiss. "You think like them. You are a ghost. You will find them." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a law. It was a command for a war that had just begun. The council fire in Tavok's longhouse crackled, casting shadows on the grim faces of the tribe's elders. The air was thick with a new, cold horror. "They will return," Tavok stated, his voice a low rumble. "They will take more." "They will," Jericho agreed. The elder at his shoulder translated his words instantly. "They will come back and harvest you. They'll take your strongest, then your fastest, until this village is nothing but the old and the young waiting to die." A growl of despair rippled through the warriors. "We cannot win a war of attrition," Jericho said, his voice cutting through the noise. "You cannot defend against this. You can't build a wall high enough to stop an enemy who plucks you from the sky." "What then, Ghost Man?" Tavok challenged, his eyes narrowed. "What is your counsel?" This was the pivot. Jericho stepped into the center of the firelight. He was no longer the consort, the prize. He was the strategist. "We stop defending," Jericho said, his voice cold and hard. "We attack, we find their base, we burn their research to the ground, and we get your warriors back. We hunt them." The silence that followed was a stunned, sudden intake of breath. The concept was audacious. They were the prey. But as they looked at the man who had killed 3 predators with vines and mud, they began to see a path. Xylani, who had been watching Jericho with a terrifying, focused intensity, was the first to speak. "Where?" she asked. The council was dismissed. The tactical meeting began. They were in her dwelling, the hide flap sealed. She had taken a sharp stone and drawn a map of the territory in the packed earth floor. It was a masterpiece of topographical memory, ridges, rivers, and deep jungle. Jericho knelt opposite her, the small fire between them. "The dropship," he said. "Which way did it go?" "It flew toward the scars of the world," she replied, pointing with a long finger to a series of deep canyons on the edge of the map. "It is a dead place. Nothing grows." "Perfect," Jericho murmured. "A sterile location, easy to defend. They'll be in one of those canyons." He traced a line along a high ridge overlooking them. "We'll need a 2-pronged assault. An infiltration team here to get inside the base, free the prisoners, and plant explosives." His fingers brushed hers as he drew the line. The casual contact was like a static charge. He pulled his hand back, a reflex. Xylani's eyes flicked up to his. She didn't pull back. Instead, she deliberately, slowly laid her fingers over the line he had just drawn. "Your path is loud," she purred, her voice a low vibration. "You think like a rock slide. I will show you how a viper moves. This ridge, it is watched. The true path is here." She drew a new line, a winding, counterintuitive path through a series of interlocking caves. "Through the dark," she said, "we will emerge inside their nest." He stared at the map, then at her. His respect for her, purely as a tactician, bloomed. She was an ambush predator. "All right," he said, his voice rough. "You get us in, I get us out." The next 24 hours were a blur of intense, forced collaboration. They moved to a hidden clearing to train her most elite hunters. The Bond and 50 Shades dynamic merged, becoming a dangerous fusion of tactics and tension. Their tech is their strength, Jericho explained, holding up the salvaged power cell. And their weakness. He showed them how to crosswire it. This creates an electromagnetic pulse. It will freeze their suits, their weapons, their visors. A second is all you need. Xylani watched, absorbing every detail. When he was done, she stepped forward. And we have our own tech, she said. She led him to a gnarled, sickly-looking tree, its bark weeping a thick, black sap. She took her obsidian knife, smeared the sap on the blade, and thrust it into a piece of salvaged predator armor plating. It sizzled. The metal didn't melt, but the synthetic polymers and rubberized seals beneath it began to smoke, curl, and dissolve. The shadow sap, she said, it eats not flesh. Jericho stared, his mind racing. The joints, he whispered. The visor seals, the power conduits. He looked at her, a new raw admiration in his eyes. How long does it take? Xylani looked from the dissolving armor back to him, her eyes heavy-lidded, her blue tail giving a slow, single twitch. That depends, she murmured, her voice dropping, on how deep you want the poison to go. The air between them was so thick he could barely breathe. He had to consciously force his mind back to the mission. Good, he said, his voice tight. Now let me show you how to use it. This was where it shifted. You're fast, he told her as they stood apart from the others. It's beautiful, but it's loud. You move to kill. You need to move to assassinate. Show me, she demanded. He stepped behind her. Mime a kill on a sentry, he ordered. She moved, a blur of speed, her training knife arcing in a fast, brutal stab to the neck. No. He moved, his body pressing flush against her back. He was taller, broader, and for a second he enveloped her. He put his right hand over hers, his fingers lacing with hers on the knife hilt. His other hand went to her hip, his touch firm, tactical, and yet it was the most intimate contact he had ever experienced. He could feel the heat of her back against his chest. He could smell her hair, pine and that sharp, musky scent. He could feel her heart, beating a steady rhythm against his ribs. Slow is smooth is fast, he whispered, his lips grazing the furred tip of her ear. She shivered, but didn't pull away. You don't stab, you insert. He guided her arm, his muscles moving with hers, in a precise, silent arc toward an invisible kidney. You use the sap on the seals of the neck guard first. He moved their bodies as one, his hand on her hip guiding her into a quarter turn. Then you strike, but you don't pull back. You turn with them as they fall. He demonstrated, his legs sweeping against hers. You catch them, you lower them, no sound, you become their shadow until they have no shadow left. He held her there, his body pressed against hers, his hand over hers, in the final lethal position. She was breathing a little faster now. She was learning. This wasn't submission, this was a predator acquiring a new, more lethal skill. And to her, that was the ultimate arousal. She leaned back against him, just slightly, a conscious, accepting pressure. Again, she whispered, her voice husky. They returned to the village at dusk, the new, lethal alliance hanging between them. A large rival warrior, Rax, who had been openly glaring at Jericho, saw them. He saw the human pet walking beside the huntress, not behind her. Jericho was pointing out new guard placements when Rax stepped in front of him, shoving him hard in the chest. The ghost man gives orders? Rax snarled. He is a prize, not a chief. He has no right. Jericho tensed, his body dropping into a combat stance. He didn't get the chance. Xylani moved like blue lightning. She didn't challenge Rax. She ended the confrontation. She slammed the butt of her spear into his solar plexus, and as he gasped, she swept his legs. Rax hit the ground, and in the next instant, Xylani was on his chest, her obsidian knife at his throat, pressing deep enough to draw blood. The entire village went silent. You will listen to my ghost, she snarled, her face inches from his. He speaks with my voice. You will obey him as you obey me, or I will feed your tongue to the shadow boars. She stood, yanking her blade back. Rax scrambled away, his hands at his throat, eyes wide with terror and submission. The message was clear. Jericho's authority was absolute because it was an extension of hers. That night, in her hut, the air was different. He wasn't on the pet's furs. He was sitting by the fire, cleaning the shadow sap from his hands. She was on her dais, watching him. You are not just a ghost, she said, her voice quiet. He looked up. A ghost is an echo of something dead, she clarified, her eyes locking on his. You are a shadow. Yes, a slow, dangerous smile touched her lips. It moves with you. It has substance. It has a cold, sharp edge. She paused, her gaze traveling down his body and back to his eyes, and it fits me perfectly. The mouth of the cave was a black, jagged wound in the canyon wall, invisible from the sky. It was damp, and the air smelled of cold stone and mineral salts. Xylani led, her body a fluid shadow in the near-total darkness. Jericho was right behind her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. Not a caress, but a tactical tether for communication in the dark. He could feel the movement of her spine, the shift of her muscles. They moved for an hour, their path winding down into the earth. This was her world, her tactic. The Viper's path. Finally, she stopped. Here, she whispered. Jericho moved past her, his salvaged microtool in hand. Before them was a heavy, prefab metal grate, a ventilation shaft. It was exactly what he was looking for. He worked on the electronic lock, his movements precise. The mechanism clicked, sliding open without a sound. They emerged into a humming, sterile white maintenance corridor. Cameras, he whispered, pointing, on a 5-second loop. A predator sentry stood at the far end, his back to them, watching the main hallway. Xylani didn't wait for a command. She was a blur of motion, her feet making no sound on the metal grating. Jericho watched. It was his move, perfected by her. She didn't charge. She flowed, a shadow detaching from the wall. She applied the black shadow sap to the neck seal of the predator's armor. He stiffened, sensing something, but it was too late. She didn't stab him. She moved with him, her obsidian knife finding the gap the sap had created, her other hand covering his mouth. She didn't let him fall. She lowered him, catching his weight, and laid him on the ground as if he were a sleeping child. She looked back at Jericho, her eyes bright in the dim light. It was a look of shared lethal purpose, a consummation of their new bloody alliance. He nodded and they moved on. He found the main lab, a reinforced blast door. "Get ready," he murmured, bypassing the lock. The door hissed open. The sight was worse than he had imagined. It was a biolab, pristine and cold, and it was full. Dozens of stasis pods lined the walls, each one holding a warrior. Kale, the other two, and more. So many more. Feline warriors from tribes he didn't recognize, all suspended in glowing blue liquid. This is... Xylani's voice for the first time was shaken. On a central table, a datapad was active, showing a 3D genetic model of her people, with enhancements noted: increased muscle density, subdermal plating, dampened empathy response. They weren't just cloning, they were improving. "The charges," Jericho said, his voice a low growl. He pulled out the 3 overcharged power cells he'd rigged as explosives. "Plant them. Get Kale and your men, we have 5 minutes." Xylani and her hunters, the 2 she'd brought with them, sprang into action, smashing the pod controls, dragging their dazed, half-conscious warriors to their feet. Jericho was setting the last charge when a heavy, mechanized clang echoed down the hall. "He's here," Jericho said. The lights flashed, and a deep, synthesized voice he remembered from that first day boomed over the speakers. "The ghost," Vrel snarled. "And the blue-haired bitch. You cost me my command, my suit. They demoted me to this gene farm. Now I will take your heads as compensation." Vrel appeared. He wasn't in sleek battle armor. He was in a heavy-duty, industrial exosuit, a cargo loader retrofitted with a hydraulic claw and a rotary plasma caster. He was Rage given a 10-foot, 3-ton metal body. He opened fire. The lab erupted. Plasma bolts vaporized stasis pods, sending glass and steaming blue liquid everywhere. "Get them out!" Jericho yelled at Xylani, shoving her toward the ventilation shaft. "Go! That was the plan!" "The plan changed," Xylani snarled. She loosed an arrow from her bow. It was coated in shadow sap. It struck the exosuit's shoulder, but bounced off the thick plating. "We kill the head of the snake." "Fine," Jericho gritted, sliding behind a bank of computers. "Draw his fire!" It was a lethal ballet. Jericho was the distraction, the bond agent. He ran, slid, and dodged, using the environment, forcing Vrel to fire on his own expensive equipment. "Over here, you rusted-out shell!" Vrel roared, swinging his claw, obliterating the console Jericho had been behind a second before. "Hold still, Ghost." "Xylani, the joints!" Jericho yelled. He pulled his last EMP cell. He didn't throw it. He slid it like a hockey puck. Across the smooth floor, it stopped directly beneath the exosuit. Jericho triggered it. The suit seized, lights flickering, frozen in place. Now! Xylani was already moving. She fired 2 arrows in rapid succession. They struck the hydraulic joints at the suit's knee and elbow. The sap sizzled, black smoke pouring from the mechanisms. The suit rebooted, but it was compromised. It moved with a lurching, grinding sound, its right arm sluggish. Vrel was trapped, roaring in fury. He swiped at Xylani. She dodged, but the claw caught the wall, bringing down a shower of debris, cutting off her escape. Vrel pinned Jericho behind a heavy stasis pod, the metal groaning under the pressure of the claw. "You die, human! You die!" Jericho saw Xylani above, in the gantries. She'd climbed, she was looking at him. It was the same setup as the first day, but now they were a team. She dropped. She landed on the back of the exosuit, a silent blue-furred demon. Vrel thrashed, trying to reach her, but his damaged arm couldn't find the angle. Xylani didn't use an arrow. She had her obsidian knife, its blade black with sap. She didn't attack the suit. She attacked the pilot. She drove the knife again and again into the thick, armored seals of the cockpit canopy. The seals dissolved, the canopy sparked and cracked. With a final furious scream, Xylani tore the smoking canopy open, reached inside, and grabbed Vrel by his harness. She pulled. The Predator leader, now just a terrified man, tumbled out of the driver's seat and crashed to the floor. He scrambled for a sidearm that wasn't there. Xylani landed in front of him, her body coiled. He looked up at her, his face a mask of terror. She didn't use the sap. She didn't use a ghost kill. She planted her foot on his chest, raised her simple, fire-hardened obsidian knife, and drove it straight through his throat, pinning him to the floor. It was a primal, brutal, and just kill. The lab was silent, save for the hum of the failing systems and the sound of the charges beeping. "Kale!" Xylani called, her voice rough. Her second-in-command, dazed but on his feet, nodded. They evacuated, dragging the freed warriors into the tunnels. As they fled, the base's automated distress call screamed into the ether. On Jericho's wrist, a piece of tech he'd thought long dead flickered to life. His Alliance distress beacon. It had been damaged, set to passive. The base's automated SOS had tripped it. A small green light pulsed, Alliance rescue en route, ETA 48 hours. They stood on the canyon ridge as dawn broke, watching the Predator base below erupt in a series of secondary explosions. The column of black smoke rose for miles. He was staring at the blinking green light, home, his old life, control, sterility, emptiness. Xylani saw it. She stepped in front of him, her face streaked with soot and Vrel's blood. Her expression was unreadable. She didn't beg, she didn't command. She had won. Her people were free. She reached up and with a strange, grave formality, touched the center of his chest, where her spear tip had first claimed him. "The harness is broken," she said, her voice quiet. The elder standing nearby translated softly. "The life price is paid. You saved us. You are free, Jericho." She used his name, for the first time. She turned and began the walk back to her village. Kale and the others, supporting their freed brothers, followed her. Jericho stood alone on the ridge. He looked at the flashing green light, a link to his past. He looked at her, a silhouette against the rising sun, a future of primal, dangerous, real life. He let her take 3 steps. "Xylani," he said. She stopped, her back to him, her tail giving a single slow twitch. He deliberately, slowly unclasped the beacon from his wrist. He looked at it for one final second. Then he raised it high and smashed it against the hard canyon rock. The green light died with a small, pathetic crack. He walked toward her. He didn't take her hand. He didn't touch her. He just fell into step beside her. She glanced at him, her lips pulling back from her teeth. It was not a smile of victory. It was a smile of welcome. They walked back to the village together.